The ring wasn't hers to keep, neither was the name. She had worn both for 14 months, and neither one had ever felt like something that belonged to her, more like items checked out from a lending library, useful for the season, expected to be returned in good condition. Her name, before the marriage, had been Weston. Nettie Weston. Her mother had called her Nettie since she was small, on account of a preference for tidiness she had apparently shown in the cradle. Her father had called her Antoinette when he was proud of her, which was less often than she would have liked to remember. Her younger sister Blythe had called her nothing useful at all, mostly just you, in that particular tone that meant I want something and I know you'll give it. After the wedding, she became Mrs. Ashby. The card said so. The church record said so. The man standing beside her at the altar had said so, in a voice that carried no particular warmth but no contempt either. Just statement. Fact. The way a man might read a shipping invoice aloud. His name was Garrett Ashby. Not a lord, not a duke. The Ashby family held no title, but they held something in certain circles that title holders envied. Money old enough to have forgotten where it came from, and a name that had never been touched by scandal in living memory. Until, of course, it was. The arrangement had been her father's idea. That was how her father's ideas usually arrived. Quietly, reasonably, dressed in the language of opportunity rather than obligation, so that by the time she understood what was being asked of her, it was already half agreed. Garrett Ashby is a serious young man, her father had said, one evening in the study, while her mother sat very still by the window and looked at her hands. He has taken over the family holdings since his father's illness. He is capable. He is steady. He has expressed interest in what? Nettie had asked. Her father had looked at her the way he sometimes looked at things he found inconveniently literal. In the family. In a suitable arrangement. She had understood then. She also understood, though no one said it plainly, that Blythe's situation had created a particular kind of pressure on the Weston name. Blythe, at 19, had managed in the span of 8 weeks to be seen alone with 2 different men at 2 different events, to refuse a perfectly reasonable proposal from a banker's son, in a manner that had apparently been described as dramatic by 3 separate witnesses, and to write a letter that had somehow found its way into the wrong hands, that no one in the family was willing to read aloud, but everyone had heard about. The Weston name was not ruined, but it was leaning. Garrett Ashby had come to the house twice before the engagement was formally announced. Both times he had spoken mostly to her father. Both times he had been polite to her mother. Both times he had looked at Nettie with the same measuring expression she associated with men inspecting horses at auction. Not unkind, exactly, but not personal. She had asked her mother, the night before the wedding, whether she thought Garrett Ashby was a good man. Her mother had been quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I think he is an honest one." Nettie had gone to sleep trying to decide whether those were the same thing. The Ashby house was larger than the Weston house, which she had expected. What she had not expected was that it would feel, on first arrival, so thoroughly already finished. Every room complete, every surface in its place. The flowers in the entryway were fresh but arranged without any apparent affection, as though someone had understood that flowers belonged in entryways, and had handled that requirement efficiently. She had her own rooms, a sitting room, a bedroom, a small writing desk placed near a window that looked out over the garden. Mrs. Crane, the housekeeper, showed her through them with a practiced cordiality that made Nettie feel simultaneously welcomed and assessed. Garrett did not eat breakfast with her. She discovered this on the second morning, when she came down at 7:30 and found a single place set at one end of the long dining room table, and a footman who explained, without particular expression, that Mr. Ashby took his morning meal in his study. She ate alone, and looked at the wallpaper, and thought, well, this is what it is. She had known going in that this was not a love match. She was a practical person, or had always believed herself to be. She had not expected poetry. She had not expected to be made to feel wanted, exactly. She had understood that she was solving a problem, and that Garrett Ashby had needed something the Weston family could provide, and that this was a transaction dressed up in orange blossoms. What she had not quite anticipated was how quiet it would be. Not unpleasant. Garrett was civil. He was present at dinner most evenings, and when he was, he spoke to her. Not at length, not with particular curiosity, but he spoke. He asked whether she found the house comfortable. He mentioned when he expected to be away on business. He passed the salt without being asked, which she had decided to count as a small kindness. But there was a distance between them that didn't seem to have a name. Not coldness. Coldness would have implied emotion in the wrong direction. This was more like space. Like the gap between 2 pieces of furniture in a room, that had been arranged by a professional with an eye for proportion, leaving exactly enough room between them to walk through, nothing more. She had come into his house. She had taken his name. She had brought, as far as she could tell, nothing he particularly needed beyond her family's good standing, which, between Blythe's letter and her father's relief at the settlement, hadn't been worth quite as much as the price suggested. By the third month, she had found her routines. She wrote letters in the morning. She walked in the garden when the weather permitted. She called on two of the neighboring families, who were polite and curious in equal measure, and asked about the wedding, and about Garrett, and about her family, in the particular way that wanted information without seeming to want it. She had begun, quietly, to read through the household accounts. Not because anyone had asked her to. Because she needed something to do with her mind, and the accounts were there, and she was good with numbers in a way that had never been especially praised in her, but had occasionally been useful. She found a discrepancy in the third week of March. Not large, $42, spread across several entries in a way that was almost, but not quite, invisible. She looked at it for a long time. Then she closed the ledger and opened it again the next morning to make sure she hadn't misread. She hadn't. She didn't say anything. Not yet. She wrote the figure down in a small notebook she kept in her desk drawer, and she kept reading. It was at the Harmon dinner that she first understood something had shifted. The Harmons held a supper every month for a particular set of people, business families, mostly, with a few of the older names mixed in. Garrett went regularly. Nettie had accompanied him twice before without incident. This time, she found herself seated across from a man she hadn't met before, a Mr. Calder, who had recently come into some kind of partnership with the Ashby Holdings. He was about 50, well-dressed, with the easy manner of someone who had always found rooms cooperative. He talked at length about the expansion of Garrett's shipping interests. He mentioned figures. He mentioned a new arrangement in Baltimore that was expected to double the return on a particular set of investments within 18 months. Nettie listened. She was good at listening, which people tended to mistake for passivity. Halfway through the fish course, Mr. Calder said something that lodged in her chest like a splinter. "Your husband has been very generous," he said, in that light, conversational tone people use when they're saying something they expect to pass unnoticed. "Particularly given the trouble last quarter. But that's Garrett, always finds a way to smooth things over," she said. "The trouble last quarter?" with what she hoped sounded like mild social interest. Mr. Calder paused, just briefly, then smiled. "Oh, nothing that lasted. You know how these things go." She said she did, though she didn't, and she spent the rest of the dinner being very pleasant and paying careful attention. On the carriage ride home, she looked out the window. Garrett sat across from her, looking at nothing in particular. She said, "Who is handling the Callaway account?" She felt, rather than saw, the small stillness that moved through him. It lasted less than a second. "Patterson," he said. "Why?" "I was curious," she said. "I've been going through the household accounts." The name came up. "The household accounts don't include the business ledgers." "No," she agreed, "they don't." Another silence. The carriage moved through the dark streets, and the gas lamps flickered past the window in intervals. "You should leave the business accounts to Patterson," Garrett said. Not unkindly, just flatly, the way he said most things. "Of course," she said. She looked at the window the rest of the way home, but her mind was elsewhere, back in that small notebook in her desk drawer, and the $42, and the things Mr. Calder had not quite said. She found the letters by accident. That was the honest version of events, though she understood that honest versions of events were rarely the ones that got believed. She had been looking for a letter of her own. A note from her aunt in Philadelphia that she was fairly certain had been mixed it with a stack of correspondence on the hall table, which the housemaid had apparently filed somewhere sensible. In the process of asking Mrs. Crane about it, she had been directed to a small writing cabinet in Garrett's study where miscellaneous papers were sometimes collected before sorting. Garrett was out. He had told her he would be at the dockyard until 4. Mrs. Crane had left her there with a kind of careful neutrality that Nettie had come to recognize as the housekeeper's version of "I am not responsible for what you find." The letters were in a folder near the back of the second drawer. They were not hidden, or rather, they were filed, which was different from hidden, but achieved some of the same effect through sheer volume of ordinary paperwork above them. There were 6 of them, all addressed to Garrett, all in the same handwriting, all from someone who signed herself V. She sat down. She read them. She read them twice. They were not what she might have feared, in a different kind of story. They were not love letters. They were something, in a way, more complicated. They were letters from a woman who had been owed money. A significant sum, apparently, transferred from a business arrangement that had gone wrong, and who was requesting, with increasing firmness across the 6 letters, that the situation be resolved before it required outside attention. The most recent letter was dated 11 days ago. The last line read, "I have been patient, Garrett, because I believed you intended to do right by this. I am beginning to wonder if I was mistaken." Nettie sat in the study for a long time. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, she could hear a cart on the street, and somewhere in the house, the sound of someone sweeping. She thought about what she knew. She thought about what she didn't know. She thought about the $42, and Mr. Calder's smoothed-over smile and the way Garrett had gone still for less than a second when she'd mentioned the Calloway account. She put the letters back exactly as she had found them. She found her own letter from Philadelphia under a copy of the shipping news. She thanked Mrs. Crane. She went upstairs to her sitting room and opened her notebook. She did not tell Garrett what she had found, not immediately. This was a decision she made deliberately, and for reasons that were not entirely comfortable to examine. Part of it was that she didn't yet know what she had found. V could be many things. The letters could be misread. She had read them carefully, and she didn't think so, but she understood that certainty arrived in its own time and couldn't be forced. Part of it was something else, something quieter, harder to name. For 14 months, she had existed in this house as a presence that was acknowledged but not particularly consulted. She had eaten dinner across from Garrett and answered his polite questions about the weather and her letters and her health, and she had thought. Sometimes, in the evenings, sitting with her embroidery, she didn't particularly care about. That he looked at her the way he looked at the furniture. Present. Adequate. Not requiring attention. She did not think she was owed love. She hadn't come into this expecting love. But she thought she might be owed something, some degree of being seen as a person in the house rather than a piece of it. And she understood, with a clarity that was equal parts cold and useful, that what she had found in that cabinet gave her something she had not possessed before. Not leverage. She didn't think of it that way, and she would not have used it that way, but information. And information, she had learned from numbers, was almost always the thing that made the difference. She kept reading the household accounts. She began, carefully, to map what she knew. She asked Garrett, at dinner on a Thursday, whether he was planning to attend the Whitmore reception the following week. He said he hadn't decided. She said she had heard Mr. Calder would be there. He looked at her, just briefly, then back at his plate. "Probably," he said. "I'd like to come," she said, "if that suits." He said it suited and passed her the bread. At the reception she found the woman herself. It wasn't difficult. She simply paid attention, which was what she usually did. She had figured out, from the letters, that V was connected to the Calder partnership through a secondary arrangement involving the sale of a property that had once belonged to her late husband. She knew enough, from the business circles Garrett moved in, to narrow the field. The woman was standing near the windows, speaking with a group she didn't quite belong to, present, pleasant, but not quite included, in the way that women sometimes were at these events when they came without a clear social category. Nettie watched her for a while. Then she walked over and introduced herself. "I'm Mrs. Ashby," she said. "I don't believe we've met." The woman, late 30s, dark-eyed, with the kind of composure that comes from having survived something, looked at her for a moment with an expression that was very carefully arranged. "Vera Sutton," she said. They talked for 20 minutes, about nothing in particular, on the surface. But Nettie had gotten good, in 14 months of careful attention, at conversations that were about more than what they appeared to be. Vera Sutton was not, as she had half wondered, a woman with a personal claim on Garrett's affections. She was something more straightforward and, in its way, more serious. A woman who had been cheated. Not by Garrett himself. Nettie understood this gradually, as the conversation turned and doubled back on itself in the way that honest conversations eventually do, when both parties decide stop pretending. By a man who had used Garrett's name and the suggestion of Ashby backing to arrange a sale that had left Mrs. Sutton with a contract worth considerably less than promised, and by the time she'd understood what had happened, the money had moved somewhere she couldn't follow. She wanted Garrett to fix it, not because he had done it, because his name had been used, and because he knew who had. She had been writing to him for 8 months. He had not written back. Nettie stood at the window and looked at the room. Garrett across it, speaking with 2 men she didn't know, his shoulders set in that characteristic way he had, controlled and self-contained, giving nothing away. She thought about the 6 letters in the filing cabinet. She thought about what he had not told her, and what he had not done, and why. She thought, he is not a bad man. She had believed that from the beginning, or wanted to. But she had also started to wonder, in recent months, whether or not bad was a thing that could sustain a person through a life. She turned back to Vera Sutton. She said, "Tell me the name." What she did with the name was not dramatic. It never is, when it's done right. She wrote a letter. She wrote it carefully, over the course of 2 evenings. In her sitting room with the door closed and the lamp turned up. She addressed it to a particular attorney, a man her father had used, who owed the Weston family no particular loyalty, but who had a reputation for handling things that required both discretion and genuine knowledge of commercial contracts. She laid out what she knew. She was precise. She did not speculate past what the documents could support. She mentioned the letters. She mentioned the Calder connection. She mentioned the property sale, and the figures she had assembled from what she had found and what Vera Sutton had told her. She did not mention Garrett by name, except as the person to whom the letters had been written. She sealed the letter and she sent it. Then she went downstairs and found her husband in his study, and she sat down across from his desk without being invited. And she put her notebook on the surface between them. He looked at the notebook. He looked at her. "I need to tell you something," she said. What followed was not an argument, exactly. It was more like the careful dismantling of a wall that had been built in sections, in the dark, without either of them realizing the other was adding bricks. He had known about the scheme. Not at its start. She believed that, because his voice changed when he talked about the beginning, went quieter and tighter, in a way that she had come to recognize as the sound he made when something cost him. But he had known, by the time the letters started coming, enough to understand that he was complicit by inaction. He had not written back to Vera Sutton because he had not known what to say. He had not known what to say because the man who had used his name was someone he had trusted, someone he still dealt with, someone embedded in the Ashby business arrangements in a way that was difficult to extract without cost. He had been, in other words, doing the same thing people always do with costs they don't want to pay. Not deciding, in the hope that the situation would resolve itself into something easier. "It won't," Nettie said. "I know," he said. "She's been waiting 8 months. I know. And the longer it continues, the more it costs you. Not just money. The other kind." He was quiet for a moment, the lamp threw a light across the desk and the notebook in his hands, which were, she noticed, not entirely still. "How did you find the letters?" he asked. "I was looking for a letter from my aunt," she said. "I was directed to the filing cabinet." He looked at her for what felt like a long time. She wasn't sure what he was looking for. She held still and let him look. "You've been going through the accounts," he said. Not accusation, more like someone adjusting a map they've been reading wrong. "I needed something to do," she said. "I'm not useful as an ornament." Something moved across his face. She wasn't entirely sure what it was. "No," he said quietly, "I can see that." He wrote to Vera Sutton the next morning. He showed Nettie the letter before he sent it, which she had not expected, and which she found that she minded less than she would have guessed. The letter was honest. More honest than she might have anticipated, from a man she had spent 14 months cataloging as someone who preferred closed doors. He acknowledged the delay. He did not offer excuses, or not many. He named a figure and a timeline. The matter of the man who had used his name was more complicated. It took several weeks, and an attorney. Not the one she had written to, but one Garrett engaged on his own, after she had told him about her letter, and he had looked at her with an expression she still wasn't sure how to categorize. It ended without the worst possible outcomes, which was, she had come to understand how most things ended, not with triumph, but with the particular relief of avoided catastrophe. What changed between them was harder to describe than any of that. It was not that he suddenly became warm, or that she stopped noticing the ways in which the marriage was still, at its core, a practical arrangement between two people who had not chosen each other in the usual sense. She was not naive about what they were to each other. And she didn't think he was either. But something had shifted. She had walked into his study and put a notebook on his desk, and sat down without being invited, and he had not asked her to leave. And she thought, sometimes, that the moment she remembered most clearly from all of it was not the conversation in the study, or the reception where she had found Vera Sutton, or even the evening she had first read the letters. It was the carriage ride home from the Harmon dinner, in the dark, when she had said the Calloway account and watched him go still. Because he had answered her, not with the full truth, not then, but he had answered, and he had looked at her, and there had been something in that look that was different from the way he looked at furniture. In February, he asked her to join him for breakfast. He said it the night before, at dinner, without particular ceremony. I've been thinking of changing my schedule. Morning works better. If you're amenable, she said she was amenable. She came down the next morning at 7:30 and found two places set at the table. He was already there, reading something, a cup of coffee at his elbow. He looked up when she came in. He did not say anything immediately, and she did not say anything either. She sat down. The footman poured her coffee. After a moment, Garrett folded whatever he was reading and set it aside. The accounts, he said. If you want to continue with them, the business accounts, not just the household. Patterson could walk you through the system. She looked at him across the table. I'd like that, she said. He nodded. He picked up a coffee. She picked up hers. Outside, the light came through the dining room windows in the particular way it did in February, thin and level, making everything look a little more like what it actually was. She thought, this is not what I expected. She thought, I don't know yet what it is. She thought, I am sitting at a table in a house that is beginning, in small ways, to feel like mine. And the man across from me is not the man I thought I had married, which I had expected to mean something worse than it does. She drank her coffee. He drank his. Somewhere in the house, she could hear Mrs. Crane giving instructions in her practiced, unhurried voice, and the sound of the kitchen beginning its day. She thought, I suppose we begin.